1.8 PvP has been around for pretty much forever, and while millions of players have enjoyed it over the years, and a considerable part of them have become pretty good at the game, only very few have managed to get so good that they are considered to be the best players. In this video, I will cover these players, those that have such a high skill level that even players who spend thousands of hours playing the game will have almost no chance against them. Note that I will only cover 1.8 in this video, as that is generally the version that I know the most about. I'll ask any 1.9 player who watches this to tell me who they would consider to be the best player in their main version, so that I can maybe do a video like this for 1.9 players in the future. In the very early days of PvP, the best players were undoubtedly the Soup players, as Soup was pretty much the most skillful game mode at the time. PvP techniques such as W tapping, block hitting were almost inexistent, and what most people would only do is simply aim and left click. In Soup, however, you had to manage your inventory and your hotbar, as Soups instantly healed you 3.5 or 4 hearts depending on the server. And you would have a hotbar of empty bowls, which you would then have to refill with soups in your inventory, or you would even have to recraft them. This high skill level made a lot of people really try hard Minecraft, and some notable players from the time were Zephyr, who was pretty much the first to make a quick dropping tutorial, which was basically dropping the soup directly after eating it, which made it possible to soup a lot faster and more efficiently. And he also made one of the first jitter click tutorials, which was one of the first things that made people realize that there was more to Minecraft. Now, alongside Zephyr, there was also Schmorky, who had a very large influence on PvP, as he was the first one to release a sprint reset tutorial, which was pretty much the basis for most PvP techniques that were to come. His series of advanced PvP tutorials are actually, to this day, probably a good thing to watch for beginners, as they are not really that outdated, and for the time he certainly was an insane player. And of course, there was also Stimpy. Now, Stimpy is now mostly known for his pod PvP skills, but he used to actually also be a Soup player, and he was known for his skills since pretty much the beginning. He then became one of the best pod PvPers of all time, and even to this day, with him being very inactive, he still is a very strong player, even though a lot of players also caught up to his skill level. Now, moving on, there was also Badline. Now, Badline was pretty much the competitive server from 2015 to 2018. There are way too many names to list here, so we'll just name the best known one, Dante. Now, Dante, who now is a professional Overwatch player, was considered by many to be the best PvP player, as his skill level was insane for the time, and he and the rest of the Badline server certainly made the skill ceiling way higher than it used to be. Unfortunately, Badline closed in 2018 due to an increasing amount of cheaters and a lack of interest in PvP, which came at a time where Fortnite was dominating Minecraft. Now, in 2019 and especially 2020, there was a huge resurgence in Minecraft's popularity, and one of the big names was Technoblade. Now, Technoblade is probably one of the first people that comes to mind when thinking about good PvPers. He was probably the most well-known PvPer before his unfortunate death due to cancer a few months ago. While he was certainly a very good player and way above average, he actually mostly shined through his game sense more than his raw PvP skills, something that he even said himself a few times. It would be therefore pretty inaccurate to call him the best 1.8 PvPer, as a lot of sweaty players who spend even more time playing the game are probably better in terms of skill. However, he was undoubtedly the best PvPer when it came to big YouTubers, which is why he could perform so well in tournaments. Now, Minecraft Club is a very old server at this point that used to be mainly for pod PvP, but has expanded to other game modes. It's to this day probably the biggest practice server, with over 1,000 players online at any given time and 4 regions, allowing players from all around the world to have a good experience with pretty low ping compared to playing only on NA servers. players such as Mindmanner, Armagon, Ayu Susuni, Rice Farmer 11 and a lot others have built a reputation of being the best PvPers on that server. Probably the most popular game mode is boxing, which is just a sword 1v1 where the person who gets the most hits wins. While boxing requires a lot of skill, game modes such as Build UHC are a lot more complicated and therefore require probably even more skill. As the rods, the secondaries such as lava, water and blocks require even more skills. A lot of players that would come to mind coming from Mineman Club and Hypixel would probably be players such as Sweat God, Muffin Hacks, Bob Zeb, Badline Cheats, etc. Now while these players are all insane at the game probably and would destroy 90% of all sweats, players such as Exas, Knicky and Yonyo mostly play on PvP Gym and Gome HD, which you could consider to be the competition to Mineman Club at this point. Most of them coming from the German community, but also a lot of other European countries. Just comparing gameplay from, for example, Exas to gameplay from the players I mentioned before, it becomes pretty clear that Exas is just a level above them. As the game mode on PvP Gym, such as Skywars or HG, which is soup PvP, but with secondaries such as lava, are very hard to compete in. I would consider HG to be not quite, but at a comparable skill level as Crystal PvP, and it's probably one of the hardest game modes that 1.8 has to offer. HG is also very popular in the Brazilian PvP community, as in general soup PvP never died the way it did in the rest of the world. So yeah, personally I would consider Exas right now to be the best 1.8 player overall. In certain game modes there are players who are better than him obviously, but since he is crazy good at pretty much every game mode, I would put him there. If you disagree, feel free to tell me why. And yes, don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you next time, maybe for a video about this in 1.9 or in the combat test snapshots. I'll see.